Today, my guest is Finn Morehouse. Finn is a research fellow at Forethought. That's a nonprofit that's focused on figuring out what we're supposed to do in a world of super intelligent AI. He used to be at Longview Philanthropy, and he was also at Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, so he's thought about this stuff for quite a while. His main claim here is that AI is not, or at least probably not, what he calls a normal technology. So a normal technology is one that tends to just multiply how productive we are. I don't know, take something like a phone. We had ways of communicating with each other before, but with a phone, it multiplies our ability to communicate with each other. We can communicate far easier, far more efficiently, far faster, so on and so forth. But he thinks that what's interesting and somewhat worrying, but not necessarily, about AI is that it's not a mere multiplier of productivity. It's a replacer of humans. Humans are to some extent a bottleneck in terms of how fast things can go with new technologies. But if AI can actually replace a lot of human work, then we're not dealing with a quote unquote normal technology. We talk about what is it to be a normal technology? Are we so sure that AI is not going to be a normal technology? Finn tries to steer between, we're not heading towards dystopia, but we're not heading towards utopia either. Really, we don't know where we're headed. And this means that we have a lot of conversation about what are we supposed to do in the face of that uncertainty. At some point, I'd give him two options or two ways of thinking about it that we explore. One is that we should take our best bet about which of the possibilities is going to happen and then proceed from there. The other is, knowing that we don't know which one it is, don't place any bet necessarily. And so now what's the best way to proceed? So there's a lot of talk about how should you best act in the face of just not knowing how the future is going to unfold. And we also talk a lot about the timeline here. I'm skeptical that we have any idea what the timeline is. Suppose, let's say for the sake of argument at least, that AI is heading to replace us in many respects. What does the timeline look like? If it's 5 years, that's a problem. If it's 1,000 years, okay, there's nothing we can do about that now. So what's the timeline supposed to be? How can we come to any justified claim about what the timeline is supposed to look like? Okay, so that's what this episode is about. If you want more, you can go to my Substack, readblackman.substack.com. Also, you can donate, pledge your commitment to the podcast or something like that on my Substack by subscribing there. And you can email me at em@readblackman.com. All right, let's go talk to Finn. So Finn, I would have thought there's sort of three basic ways of thinking about AI. You could be a doomer. You could think, okay, it's going to be a total shit show, or whether it's death or suffering or whatever. So those are the doomers. Then there's the starry-eyed optimists. AI is going to save the day. We're not going to have to do work. We're all going to be free to be the creative human beings that we are, blah, blah, blah. And then in between those two camps, there's the chill out. It's not going to be the doom. It's not going to be the optimism, the ideal Shangri-La. It's going to be like a normal technology that sort of does its thing. It's going to have an impact. The internet was a normal technology. It had a big impact, but nothing crazy is going on. Now, I would have thought that those three camps they cover if not all, at least the vast majority of the logical ground of positions that one can occupy about AI in the future. But you actually think that all three camps are somehow missing the point. Do I have that right?
I think so. Here's a way of putting it. In my experience, I think you can really talk about kind of two camps. The first is, like you say, this view that AI is a, quote, normal technology. We can talk about what that means, but best example is the internet. It's a big deal. Talking about billions, hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, big deal. Yeah, for sure.
But it didn't make the world unrecognizable. Okay, that's one camp.
It's working on it. Give it a second, but yeah.
Sure. The second camp is this view that, and this is a bit of a cartoon portrayal, but I think people really do think something like it. It's this view that AI is going to be a huge deal, and therefore the outcomes from AI are, in some sense, all or nothing, right? So maybe it blows up in our faces and it kills everyone, or it does something equivalently terrible. But if it doesn't do that, because the outcome's got to be extreme, the only alternative is extremely good, right? It's utopian. Suddenly we live in this world of abundance. We get as much stuff as we could reasonably want. It's hard to imagine wanting more than that. And so on that second view, where AI is a big deal, kind of natural to think It's either terrible, it's the end of the line for humanity,
Yeah.
or it's just from here on out, no more problems to address. The end of history in some important sense, and in
right.
some good sense. And I'm saying both of those views, I think, are missing something really important. I think they're basically just wrong. And happy to take either of them.
You think that AI is a normal technology or it's not a normal technology? And then, of course, as you said,
Yeah.
what do we mean by normal technology?
So I think it's very unlikely to be a normal technology.
Okay,
Partly
so yeah,
means you shouldn't be fully confident about anything. Maybe we enter into some
course.
permanent AI winter. That aside, because that's not an interesting take. Everyone knows that. So in economics, and when people talk about economic growth, they have this very specific meaning of technology, which is not very intuitive, but it's actually useful here. And it's something like just a multiplier on human work plus the stuff and the tools we have lying around. You start off like we have a bunch of kind of basic metal tools for farming. We have a bunch of human labor for plowing the fields. Fast forward a few hundred years past the Industrial Revolution to the present day. Now we have computer-controlled tractors pulling plows, and they're like automating a bunch of stuff. What they're doing is they're taking those original farmers and they're just making their labor like 100 times more valuable in some sense. And historically, I think that's actually a pretty good way to think about the common sense meaning of technology. So normal technology is just a boost on what we can already do or what we want to do. It like adds capabilities, but humans remain the bottleneck.
We had ways of communicating with each other before. Then we had telephones, and it just boosted our ability to communicate with each other. And social media, also, we had ways of communicating and connecting, blah blah blah, and trolling. And now we have a new, more efficient way of doing so.
Yeah, and the important thing about this, I think, when we think about the influence on the world, is that humans are always the bottleneck to growth at some point. You get your better farm technology or whatever.
Yeah.
But you still need someone to ultimately drive around in it, or if not drive around in it, then oversee the operation.
Yeah.
And you're making humans more valuable. Right. And what that means as well is that you can pile up more stuff, so more capital, more factory machinery or whatever. But eventually it just stops being worth piling up more stuff because, again, you just need eventually, you run out of humans, right? And so humans have never left the picture. They have in certain sectors. So occasionally a technology will substitute for humans. Think about horses are not humans, obviously, but think about horses.
Yeah, I was
in some
actually
sense, they had a job.
Horse-drawn carriages.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Now horses, they're just out of work. This is the main sense when I say that AI eventually is going to stop being something like a normal technology and start being something different. And it's a sense in which AI looks like, barring some hard to foresee impediment, looks like it could begin broadly substituting for human work rather than just boosting or complementing it. And when you plug that into the models, things just look very different and more extreme.
I'm by no stretch of the imagination a historian, but here's the vaguest sense of the Industrial Revolution.
Yep.
A lot of people on the manufacturing floor, a lot of people doing that sort of thing. We go through the Industrial Revolution. It gets a lot more efficient. We have the sort of like the birth of more office work and the science of management and that sort of stuff. And so what the machines did, the ones that the Luddites were trying to literally destroy, is replace, just like the automobile replaced the horse-drawn carriage, we replaced the factory workers with automated means and conveyor belts and blah, 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 blah. And so they were replaced in that role and new kinds of roles were created, and now we have what we've got today. I take it, though, that the Industrial Revolution, it would be, maybe you think that's an abnormal technology, but it strikes me as, in some sense, maybe not in a technical sense that you mean, a normal technology or a suite of normal technologies. And why not think that, AI is like that potentially, not saying definitely, but potentially, where, it puts certain roles get destroyed, but other kinds of roles, that business roles, occupational roles, professional roles, whatever, get created that humans then enter into, and just like the Industrial Revolution. I don't know if it's normal by the definition of it multiplies, blah, 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 but it's not something foundationally new.
Yeah, great point. And here's what I would say. So the Industrial Revolution I mean, it's not really a technology, right? It's the kind of period in history.
I said
but
suite of
those
technologies, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
So they totally did destroy jobs and entire sectors and
Yeah.
create new ones. So I'm not saying that, oh, jobs would never be destroyed before. That's like totally normal. Creative destruction,
Yes,
right? It's
right.
a good
Yeah,
thing, at least for growth, right? Maybe not a good thing for the people who are losing their jobs. But I think what I'm trying to say is if you zoom out a little bit, you zoom away from the particular jobs and you just look at what's up with the kind of economic role of people, people are just still complements to the machines, to the physical stuff. And so like wages went up, right? Because the textile manufacturing equipment and the mechanization and the mass production kind of revolution, this just means that you can make more stuff with the same amount of people. And that's what I'm saying could begin to look different. I'm not saying that wages will go down. I think they will at least initially go up and maybe a lot. But more and more things, you can just totally remove humans from the picture. So think about a factory. It's the early 19th century. You have your like textile factory in Manchester. You're beginning to make these kind of steam-powered production lines with these kind of big loom machines. You have people on the factory floor who are now like looking after the machines. At first it's just one, now it's like sophisticated enough that you can look after 10 machines at the same time. But still you need that person, otherwise one of the machines will break and then the whole thing will just clog up.
Sure.
The thing that could change is you have the equivalent of, let's say, a factory, or I think earlier on it'll be bits rather than atoms, right? It'll probably be software engineering or something like it. You have that kind of productive process running on, but you don't need anyone who's standing on the metaphorical factory floor to look over the machines, or at least you need that far less. They're only checking in on the equivalent of every week or so, right? Something like that.
Okay, yeah, this is interesting because I've been thinking about this kind of thing a lot lately, and I'm not totally sure what to make of it. And I also don't know how speculative it is. What's the timeline that we're talking about here? All right, the podcast episode that actually came out yesterday, I was talking to Zach Staples. He's a former commander of the Navy, so submarines on the mind as a result. And one thing that I think about a little bit about is something like, okay, so let's suppose we've got a bunch of scuba divers in the Navy, right? Pre-submarine times. And you're thinking about, hey, how can we 10x them? And you could think, I don't think anyone thought this, let's make automated scuba divers, right? Let's like make little robot scuba divers. Or you think, no, let's make a submarine. It's a totally different kind of thing. And we're going to replace the divers with submarines. But we're going to have people, the people are still in the loop or still crucial because you need a crew. The submarine needs a crew. Okay. And so there's a difference between creating a bigger, engineered system and then creating the sort of the human side of it that needs to oversee the system. This is like your factory floor.
Yep.
When I think about really complicated AI, so I'm thinking about what people call agentic AI now. More specifically, I'm thinking about things like an LLM connected to lots of other pieces of software. So a large language model, we already know ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're all connected to the internet now, right? But they can be connected to other tools. They can be connected to your Google Drive. They could be connected to, really trivially, a calculator. They could, if it's within a corporation, it could be connected to lots of different pieces of software within your enterprise, databases, and blah, 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 blah. And so now you've got this sort of quasi-person that's connected to all these things. And when I think about that, it feels to me less like we've got an agent and more like we have like a single unified whole, a coherent entity, a person is, and more of this sort of very complicated or complex whole made of lots of parts. It's an engineered system that's roughly analogous to something like a submarine or a commercial jet or a nuclear plant or whatever. And so I think, part of me wants to say something like this. It's one thing to say, oh, it's the agent and we just need to manage the agent. But actually there's all these bits, all these other parts to which the agent is connected that we also need to monitor. So it's one thing to create the kind of, for lack of a better word, automation or engineered system that does all these things that humans don't need to do anymore. But then we still need humans to govern that crazy machine, just like we need humans to govern the power plant. And then it's a separate step to replace those governing humans with more AI. And does that make sense? And so I guess I'm a little bit skeptical about that it's agents all the way down and all the way up, more or less immediately.
Yeah, to try saying that back, you're saying, okay, sure, you might be able to swap out some kind of human tasks with AI, but still someone's got to supervise the AI. Who
And
supervises the
teams,
supervisors?
right? And teams, I would think if you've got an AI connected to lots of other AIs, then each one of those AIs needs a kind of overseer, or a kind of itself needs governance. So there's governance of the parts, and there's governance of the whole that's comprised of the parts and all their various interdependencies, blah, blah, blah. So it feels like you need teams of experts, not just Bob.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's true. I think especially the part you mentioned about not thinking about this in terms of some single agent or agents. It's going to be more like some big mess of systems, like the economy already is. I agree with that. But I think my reply would be, why not think that among the things that AIs can do, one of them is supervise other AI systems? Right? It doesn't seem like a distinctively human skill. Now, there's a separate question of, will we somehow require by law or otherwise that we need humans, even though humans are slowing down the process, because I think humans are going to be eventually slower than they're going to be the bottlenecks. But nonetheless, we require them because we think it's important. Maybe that's a good thing. I'm not making claims about that. I'm just saying what I expect to be pretty likely. I will just say there'll be very strong economic pressure against requiring humans in the loop outside of very high stakes context, because you're just giving up so much, basically so much money, so much growth. And one thing I didn't mention, which I'll quickly mention as well, is it's not just the kind of mundane productive processes that AIs could substitute for. I think importantly, it is also technological progress itself. So just to recap what I've said so far, I'm saying historically there's been some process where you have some fixed amount of people, you have some capital, they make a bunch of stuff with factories and so on. As you pile up more capital, more factories, they become less productive because you become bottlenecked by people, and you've got to wait around for tech progress, right? To make you more productive again by coming up with new ideas, right? New kind of blueprints. I'm saying if the AIs are also doing the tech progress, then there's no longer that waiting around part. And so that whole loop that historically has driven economic growth no longer requires
it gets sped up,
for better or worse.
Right.
Look, I don't know how likely this is. It seems very plausible to me. And that's what I'm saying,
So a couple things. One note of agreement, which is not only would it be hard to get a human in the loop, but it's also unclear how effective a human loop would be, given that they're trying to govern this thing that operates so insanely fast while incorporating, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of data points, right? Verifying the outputs becomes increasingly impossible for a human to do, maybe impossible for a team of humans to do. I don't know. I think human in the loop is generally held up as this great strategy. And I think actually, no, it's a failed strategy in the face of increased complexity, but at least potentially. So that's a note of sympathy. I don't know if this is not a note of sympathy or this airing some skepticism.
Sure.
Do we have to really worry about this? What's the timeline here, right? If you tell me the timeline to its agents all the way down is 1,000 years from now, okay, all right, maybe. I'm not going to get nothing I can do about it now. Nothing anyone can do about it now. Or is it more like, no, actually, there's reasons for thinking that things actually will speed up faster? And then the last question, not quite skepticism, is suppose the timeline is relatively short. That does sound rather doomsday-y, how we kicked off the conversation.
Yeah. All very good questions. I agree the timelines matter. A lot of what I've said so far is pretty abstract. I'm saying this thing could happen in principle, but a lot of things could happen in principle if you give them enough time.
Sure. And there's all sorts of, I like to say that logical possibility is cheap, or possibility is cheap. It's possible that 5 minutes from now, a bird's going to fly into the window that I'm next to. It's possible. I have no evidence for that. So possibility is not evidence. But
Also, you look at the history of people trying to make predictions about tech progress. People are just wildly wrong in both directions. There's some anecdote that one of the Wright brothers, he writes this letter that human or unpowered flight, heavier than
won't happen
flight
in his lifetime or something like that, right?
Or maybe it's like 1,000 years or whatever. And then 2 years later, it's his own invention. Okay, let me actually try to say some things. I think that this is likely to happen, like I say, more likely than not. And then if it happens, I think it's more likely than not to happen within 50 years and maybe sooner than that. Why think this? One thing you can look at is, I don't know if you know this organization, Meta. They're running evaluations
Maybe, go on.
front-end models. I think they do great work. They did a great piece of work recently where they came up with a bunch of software engineering tasks and gave them to software engineers. And they got some measure of the tasks by how long do they take the human professionals. And then they gave the same tasks to AI. So they gave a task which took most people, or most participants, let's say 10 minutes, some tasks which took them more like an hour with some threshold of reliability. And they just saw, okay, what's the time horizon of the models? And what you can do is you can look at that as a trend over calendar time, right? So you can say in 2023, the best models, what was their kind of time horizon in terms of how long it would take a human to do the same task?
Yeah.
And the answer, I'm not looking at it right now, I'll probably get it wildly wrong, but it was not more than, I think, something like 5 minutes, maybe much less.
Mhm.
They just can't do any task to take a human more than 5 minutes without just falling off the rails completely. Fast forward to when they released this research, which was several months ago now, it's more something in the ballpark of 20 minutes and maybe more.
Yeah.
And then the second important thing is, so the time horizon is growing. It's also, if you try to just make it fit to the data, it's not linear growth. It's more like exponential growth. So it's more like a constant doubling time. And when they originally put this out, it looked like a 7-month doubling time, which means if you give it 28 months, so a year and a bit, you're, let's see, 2, 4, 8, 16 xing. I might be getting that wrong. Most powerful force in the universe, compound growth. Someone said that. The question is really, does that trend continue to hold? If it does continue to hold,
Right.
then you're looking at time horizons above a year for software engineering tasks, at least, in very short order. I think it's very hard to know if it does hold. And I think this is a very tiny slice of tasks, which I think especially easy to automate, right? Compared to, I don't know, you're an electrician or a plumber and you're fixing someone's broken sink. That's a totally different task. But the final thing I say is software engineering tasks could be especially relevant because they can be used to improve the AI itself, right? So you get this kind of feeding back process.
On that point, maybe, and now that we're getting, I don't know how broad your technical ken is, mine's relatively narrow. There's this sort of thesis that, yes, one, you've got this sort of speculation that those time horizons will increase. And then there's this companion claim that you just made, which is that they'll start working on themselves and improving themselves. And I don't know, I also think like we could just have a middling intelligence and ceaselessly iterating on itself in a middling way. And it ends up with still a middling intelligence. Again, it's possible that it engages in self-improvement. It's possible that it plateaus. And I'm just not even sure how to begin to think about possibility versus evidence. It's possible that it keeps skyrocketing. It's possible that it plateaus. It's possible it falls off a cliff. And then you throw things like quantum into the mix.
Oh, no, I think this is basically irrelevant, the quantum stuff. But
oh, okay.
I agree with the rest. Yeah, I can react to that. I agree. Anyone who is making any kind of confident claims about what will happen is overconfident. I don't agree that because we can't be confident, we might as well give up.
No, I would. Yeah. I guess here's one way of proceeding in the face of uncertainty. One is to say, let's take our best bet or take our best guess and educate judgment and say, okay, I think if I had to place a bet, we should think that this is going to happen in about 50 years. Let's proceed on the assumption of our best bet. That's one way of proceeding. I think that there's a different way as well, though, and this is not my specialty. It's sort of something that sort of rolls around my head sometimes. There's a different approach, which is to say, we don't know, and how should we proceed given our fundamental ignorance? So that seems like a very different kind of way of trying to figure out how do we move forward from here. And I guess I think that once we establish that we don't know, that's the foundation from which we leave. What do we do now, or how should we proceed? Not, we don't know, but let's take our best guess and then operate on that assumption, which may well turn out to be false.
Yeah. Very interesting. And I'll put a pin in the self-improving thing because I'm happy to talk about that. But
sorry.
On this question of just how the hell do you deal with so much uncertainty in the first place?
Yeah.
I'll put in a word for the make bet side.
Yeah.
Here are some thoughts. One is you can just ask people for their predictions and their confidence levels on a bunch of events which we're totally uncertain about, right? And in many cases, they will say that they have no idea and they'll make very uncertain kinds of bets. Sometimes they'll make more confident bets. But the important thing is you can go back and look, right, at which people were correct or not. And some people,
Sure.
they seem just very reliably better than other people at placing these bets. And two things by that. One is that they're just accurate, right? They
Sure.
know what's up more. But two, and I think this is just as important, is that they are calibrated. They know when to take a swing, and they know when they don't know, right? On some questions, they just say,
Okay. So
know,
you want to find the reliable oracles.
and you can ask those people, right? What do you think about what's going to happen in the next few years? So there is some skill, right? And the second thing I'll say is,
okay, yeah, so I say this.
just very quickly,
Yeah.
just is, I think if you had said this maybe 5 years ago, certainly 10, when we're talking about what's up with AI, we really do know so little, right? Because it's just a toy, basically. It's like an academic kind of think piece. Now we have accumulated some real, like, empirical trends. We can look back on several years worth of so far pretty robust trend lines. And
Totally, yep.
you can always say, look, we actually don't have good reasons to think they'll keep continuing. But if it stretches back 5-10 years, I think it seems reasonable to me to at least extrapolate the next, let's say, year or two, pretty big bounds. So those are two things I'll say in favor of the try to make some guesses.
Yeah. A couple things. So one, this is really getting beyond my expertise.
Sure.
I have to imagine that there's something like just given the numbers, given the quantity of people making predictions, there's bound to be some, and given the variance of all those predictions, there's just going to turn out to be some people who turn out to be right all the time or something like that over some given period of time. And it's more just a kind of luck of how things get distributed, and they have to go one way rather than the other. And it's not obvious to me how we explain that. One explanation is this person or these people are possessed of incredible insight, blah, blah, intuition, blah, 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 blah. And another is they happened to make the right guesses along the way. And since if they had made different guesses, some other people would have made their guesses, and then they would have been the people. We're just going to wind up with some people who win the lotto, epistemically speaking. So that's one kind of, I'm not sure what to do with that thought. It feels I'm probably missing something, but there's that. Why don't I? And then the other thing I want to say something like, I think that, and then there's, okay, so they've been right statistically so far. How strong is evidence that they're going to continue to be right? I'm not so sure. People were all over Nate Silver when he predicted the whatever election so accurately. And since then, I feel like it's all gone downhill. So, and then the last thing is, I think that here's a kind of solution that I could see being held to be important in the face of let's move from our uncertainty. Let's figure out the structures by which we could be extremely quickly reactive to what actually does unfold. Right? So if you're betting, you don't know if it's going to be X or Y or Z, but you bet on X and now you start preparing for X. And then Y happens and you're like, oh shit, that was a disaster. We bet on the wrong.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're like, I don't know if it's X or Y or Z, let's build fast reacting things, not Congress, at least not in America, not like we need, or at least different structures, different procedures by how a government acts, something like that. Let's build highly fast, reactive, agile, adaptable, reactive capacities to whether it turns out to be X or Y or Z. And so we're not betting on X or Y or Z, we're betting on our ability to react quickly instead of our traditional slow as shit.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay. Cool. So I'll react to the first point you made, which is how do we really know there is any skill to making forecasts?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about this kind of boiler room scam where you send out 1,000 letters to 1,000 houses. You say, hey, to 500, you say, hey, this football team's going to win. The other 500, you say the other football team. Next week, you're obviously right for half the houses. To 250, you send one team.
Right.
Someone at the end has just ended up with 8 predictions in a row.
Right,
and they're going to sign up for the $1,000 a month, the sports tips, betting tips. I think that is not what's going on. Yeah. I'm also out of my depth here, so I may be wrong.
Okay.
But, my sense is that 2 things. One is that these people I'm talking about who have accumulated strong track records on forecasting, they're making like many thousands of predictions. And I think that if the kind of null hypothesis is that everyone's making random predictions and someone's going to be getting lucky, I think it would turn out to be very unlikely that anyone would end up so far on one side of the distribution, unless there is some unless the guesses are not independent. A second thing I'll say, though, is these people are not like soothsayers. I'm not saying they have any special abilities. Actually, in many cases, they're just way less confident than other people. And like I say, they just know when to be confident. But a lot of the mistakes people make in trying to make any kinds of predictions, and I'm one of these people who makes mistakes, is overconfidence, right? As much as underconfidence. I don't think these people are, with respect to them, amazingly impressive, totally different from you or I. They're just pretty good at applying these simple rules of knowing when to be confident. And then, so the second thing you said was, if we're going to be uncertain, and we are very uncertain about where this is all heading, then doesn't it pay to just be generally responsive rather than trying to place bets? And a final point I'll make on that is, often there's this U-shape in terms of how confident you can be with time, where we can both be pretty sure what the world's going to look like tomorrow just because it's near in time to today. And then if we're talking about 5-10 years from now, and we're trying to predict all sorts of things like politics, that's just a chump's game, right? Because it's just too many moving parts. It's this big complex system. People are like responding to predictions. It's famously impossible to predict. There's some kind of dynamic, though, that when you start looking a little bit further out, you start thinking about limiting behaviors. You start thinking about just the slightly more zoomed out predictions. I think often you can start to be a little bit more confident again, just because the kind of nearer term, for example, like political outcomes, you might think wash out when we're thinking about the more zoomed out points. For example, the points I was trying to make earlier on, which isn't to say I'm especially confident, but that's another thought. Okay, and then the second thing you said was, if we are very uncertain about where AI is headed, which we totally are, why not just try to poise ourselves to be nimble, be reactive, rather than taking bets on particular outcomes?
Yep.
And here I just totally agree. And maybe this actually might bring us on to the second kind of camp that I was talking about. This is the camp that, at least to caricature them, has this view that at some point AI is going to be a kind of all or nothing event in the world, right? And things are going to be great or disastrous. Here, I'm just more inclined to say that what might be going on here is this kind of, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, near mode, far mode. It's this kind of far mode way of thinking where you forget that the world is still going to be detailed and it's still going to have, right, like individual people doing things. And it's going to contain like hundreds of problems at a time. The world's still going to look like that, right? Even if AI gets much more advanced or whatever.
Sure.
And it's not going to stop being the case that it's useful to just have a society that's just set up to be responsive to what's going on in the world. That's already important. I think already falling behind in many ways. So that to say, I just agree.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's go back to one question, which might bring us to a close, but why don't we wind up in dystopia? So let's assume, okay, forget about the destruction of humankind, but think about, and it's not going to lead to utopia where everyone just holds hands and does art all day or something. If it's not utopia and it's not utter disaster and it's not just moving people from one kind of role to another kind of role, from factory floor manager to office manager, and it is AI agents all the way up and down, why? I guess, how is that not going to lead to dystopia? Is the idea that, what is the idea? How do we squeeze by?
It's a good question. And here's one way to avoid the question, right? We've just been talking about how radically uncertain we are, or we should be, about outcomes from AI, especially if you take seriously that it's not going to be a normal technology, or it might not.
Sure.
If we're incredibly uncertain, then I think we should have uncertainty over the range of outcomes from this kind of general purpose AI. And so we shouldn't limit the kind of outcomes that we can imagine to these two kind of very extreme abstracts that I mentioned. That's one point. Like, if you don't know the answer, why think it's going to be especially terrible or especially amazing? You can just
Fair.
think
Okay.
it's going to be crazy different, but who knows?
Different. Yeah.
Think about we're having this conversation on the kind of 1800s equivalent of a podcast, and it's the Industrial Revolution, whatever this thing is.
Yeah.
Isn't going to be the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. What is it going to be? And then I don't know. I can't predict.
Right.
Like fiber optic cables and GPUs piping LLM responses across the world and so on. That's one answer. I think a swing and a more serious answer is just to take both these suggestions in turn, which is that it could be terrible and could be the end of history in some sense. A general answer is something like this. There are arguments for thinking that we should expect the AI to specifically go rogue and try to seize power over the entire world. And that might involve killing everyone. And I'm not going to say that's crazy. I think the people who really push for that argument, they're like, they've thought about it a lot. They're serious. They're pretty smart. I don't personally think that's a given. I'm going to guess I don't need to persuade you. That's not inevitable.
Yeah.
So that's one side. The other side then is just, I guess, a more general sense of how do things go well at all, maybe, if everything is so chaotic. Here's a few thoughts. One is that the world already has grown in population and wealth and just the set of things that we can do technologically just so like thousands of times, right? Things are happening faster, incomprehensibly faster from the point of view of our ancestors. And that doesn't mean that things have fallen off the rails or that things are amazing, right? Because as well as the rest of the world speeding up, kind of we in some sense also speed up in our ability to react and navigate and understand. And I think that'll be the case with AI, right? AI will help us interpret what's going on and be on our side in some sense. That's one point. Here's another kind of silly point. We were talking about horses, right?
Yeah.
Horses are like an existence proof that you can like, as a group, be in work one day and then after some technological revolution, more or less be totally out of work. A friend of mine who's an economist was telling me that he actually looked into the kind of, in some sense, the like income share that horses get, right? How much people still spend on horses.
Okay,
Which is a stupid question in some sense. But the thing that he realized is actually people don't, on net, actually seem to spend much less on horses these days than before we had motorized cars and we did have horse-drawn carriages.
Yeah.
And the reason is, right, we have less uses for horses, but we're also just fantastically richer. And so it's just much less of a big deal to throw money at the remaining uses of horses. Don't place too much weight on that, but the fact that there will be so much wealth, I think, is actually some cause for hope. It's very hard to imagine.
So we can look forward to being the sort of the playthings of AI.
So to be clear, I don't think this is what I expect. Right? This is now sounding too sci-fi for even my take.
I know, but I take the point, which is something like I think the foundational point is really the first one you made, which was we just don't know. It could go this way, it could go that way. It could go like something that's structurally analogous to the way that it went for horses. Not literally exactly the way that it went for horses, but it can go either way. We just don't know. I think your view is similar to mine, which is something like my go-to is, I don't know what's going to happen. Probably we're just going to bumble along the way that we've always been bumbling along. And some great shit's going to happen and some really bad shit's going to happen. And it's just going to keep going on like that. That's my view.
Yep. And it sounds like we have very similar views. If we have different views, it sounds like maybe I want to say we'll be bumbling along in a very different way if we continue to bumble along.
For sure. I think the point about the Industrial Revolution, not being able to predict what it's going to look like on the other side of that revolution, I think that seems right. I don't know. And I also don't like it when people use the Industrial Revolution as a piece of evidence because it's like a sample size of one. Okay. Totally. Great. That one thing happened and it led to a change in jobs and here's how it went. You can't infer from that the next kind of thing that's analogous to the Industrial Revolution called the digital revolution or the AI revolution is going to operate the same way. It's a different thing. You have one example. So why should I extrapolate from that?
Yep. Yeah, I think we just forced to play this game, which is looking for pieces of evidence. And they're so hard to come by because we're thinking about potentially some transformational change, maybe not.
Yeah.
That's not really happened, like you say, more than a handful
Yeah.
of times historically. We don't have great analogies for the technology itself. And that means that you can get stuck in these overly fixated on particular
Yeah.
metaphors and analogies, and it's part of the problem, right?
I actually think part of this maps onto all the debates around COVID. So I remember having disputes with my mom, and what I walked away from COVID thinking, wow, people really cannot handle uncertainty. And instead of living in uncertainty, they'd rather just plunk down for a position. So I remember talking to my mom about what the risk of such and such was. I forgot exactly what the details were, but I was talking about probabilities. And I was trying to urge upon her the probability of that happening, given these circumstances, blah, blah, blah. This is the chain of events that would have to occur. And each event is independently low probability.
Yeah.
And when you combine those probabilities, the set of them happening is really low. And she had no goddamn patience for me. Fair enough. She just was like, no, it's dangerous, whatever it was. And I forgot what exactly, maybe it was like wiping down groceries or whatever it was. And then if you zoom out from that dispute with my mom, the societal debate was instead of most people saying, yeah, we don't know, what should we do in the face of the uncertainty? It was, no, I'm placing a bet. Everything is extremely dangerous versus everything is totally fine. You're overreacting. Nothing is wrong here. And then we see this. So it seems to me like it's structurally analogous to the case with AI, where there's a shit ton of uncertainty. We just don't know. People don't want to live with the uncertainty, so they plunk down for some extreme position, because even if the extreme position is uncomfortable, they'd rather have a kind of known discomfort than an unknown comfort level at all.
So I think I agree with that, but I don't think the only worry is that people are too eager to form confident views, because I think, I know, there's no shortage of people with confident takes about AI, like you say.
No, but those are people who are analogous to my mom. The other extreme.
Sorry, I see what you're saying. Yeah. What I'm trying to say here is, in the COVID example, the issue wasn't just, that people were too confident one way or the other. That was a bad thing. I think it was that people were just inappropriately responsive to the evidence, right? You got to do something.
Sure.
And
right.
I think, we should just be radically uncertain, I think is not a policy prescription.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think there is a difference between just saying these very high level things about trying not to be too confident and so on, and just doing a really good job at looking at the trend and saying, hey, looks like there's a reasonable chance this might go pandemic. And here's what our best guess is on the cost-effective ways to just save a bunch of lives here without ruining people's lives.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's going to involve, you're forced to make best guesses, back of the envelope calculations. You need to choose who to trust.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes. And then with AI, I would say, in terms of the equivalent of people who were overly confident on COVID, it's not just, I think, that people are confident. I think it's more this point around knowing, this phrase like chasing the puck, like you're playing a game of hockey, you're running towards the puck. And if you're a skilled player, you want to see the direction it's going.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debates around somewhat superficial seeming issues where if that is the only content of discussion, then I think that's just missing some really important points. So it's the content of what people are confident about, where I'm just like, this is not the main thing, right?
Yeah.
Like the fact that data centers are using like a lot of water, for example, right now. That matters, but I just don't think it's the most important fact about AI in either direction.
Okay, so last question. What would have to transpire such that you would say, told you so?
Oh, interesting. I was thinking you might ask the opposite question, because I hope I don't do this, but I can always say, give it another few years. Things are really going to look crazy. Yeah. Okay, I think some reasonable measures. One will be this thing I mentioned earlier, which is the AI basically capable of swapping in for a pretty competent ML engineer. I think that could be a very important threshold. Another threshold would be, do we get general purpose robots that can pass Steve Wozniak's coffee test, right? They can actually make coffee in a random house. They will begin obviously very expensive, but I think that will be a sign that we've entered the flat part of the kind of S-curve where we start to generate these things more and more cheaply. I also just think growth, like the feeling that things are maybe speeding up a bit, things are happening a bit more autonomously. I wonder if it might be like COVID in that respect, where there's just a feeling of, oh, something's happening here, really, before it really comes to you, something like that. But hey, I don't know.
Yeah. I remember telling our friends in Seattle when they're like, everything's crazy here. I'm like, we're on the East Coast. We'll be fine. Okay, well, I guess I was wrong.
Yeah, I felt the same.
All right, Finn, this has been really fun. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I want to thank a few people who make this all possible. Delano Alexander, he's my producer. He does such an amazing job on everything that he touches. Garrett Lang is the sound engineer. That's honestly, he's too good for me. Athmia Jairam has joined us recently. He's helping us find the best guests to bring onto this podcast. And Ashley Wassilenko helps us organize all this, get people on the schedule, get people's bios, headshots, and really keeps the train on the track. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the hard work you do.